the voice of the resistance. Geopolitical tensions continue to rise in Latin America, a region that has experienced a renaissance of progressive administrations, with Chile, Honduras, Colombia, and Brazil replacing right-wing administrations with progressive or left-wing administrations. However, in a very key place on the geopolitical map, just months before the sectional elections and a year before the Argentine presidential elections, the picture has changed drastically. On December 6, 2022, a court in the city of Buenos Aires sentenced the vice president of the nation, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, to 6 years in prison for the crime of fraudulent administration of public works in the province of Santa Cruz, and although she was acquitted of the crime of being at the head of an illegal association, simultaneously she was sentenced to be disqualified from holding public office for life. Prosecutors Luciani and Mola accused the former president of the fraud in the state, awarding public infrastructure works for more than $1 billion to the company Austral Constructions, which according to the prosecution was a company operated by a close associate of Kirchner. These events occurred just 3 months after an assassination attempt on the Argentine vice president by a 35-year-old man resident in Argentina but of Brazilian nationality, with a neo-Nazi tattoo of the Black Sun on his elbow. This has generated polarization and discontent among citizens, divided in their opinion on the matter, on the vice president, and on the process that condemns her. To obtain an in-depth analysis of the political situation in Argentina, we spoke with Adriana Spira, editor of the newspaper New Porá, on the Córdoba region, Argentina. Among her most notable work, we find a book about the victims of state torture under the Argentine dictatorship.
The problem is complex because somehow there are several crisis situations here. It is the economic situation, the political situation, the social mood. Prior to this trial that they are doing to the vice president, there was an attack against her. Here there is a fundamentally political problem which becomes economic because Argentina has had an economic problem, let's say, for a long time. It rises and falls again according to the administrations, according to the governments. Regarding what has happened, this so far is an accusation. Justice in Argentina could not be renewed since the Macri administration because, unfortunately, President Fernández did not make that decision. There has been no replacement. The Argentine justice has not been renewed. It is a justice that is in the hands of the groups of power. So there is a large sector that believes that the accusations are not real, that they are false. But this has been going on for many years. These are accusations that have been made since the period in which she was president. And, well, there has obviously been a reaction from the Peronist people because here the other issue is Peronism and the reaction against or in favor of the ruling against Kirchner. But this has many legal times this coming March. The sentence will be final or not, and there will be 1 or 2 years left because there is another instance to which, of course, she is going to appeal. She has already appealed, and now Kirchner is asking also that the people who were involved in the attempt on her life be investigated and put in jail. So this is a very conflictive moment. We are months away from the election because in the month of June, the legislative and regional elections will take place, and then in October, the presidential elections. What has had the most impact, that was Cristina, after she was sentenced, said that she was not going to run as a candidate and ratified it yesterday in a speech, saying that it is a ban on Peronism, not just her personally. So Peronism has a history of prescription. Juan Domingo Perón spent 18 years in exile. Here, I think, is the problem. The heart of the issue is Peronism or anti-Peronism. This country has been run like this for 65 years. There have been periods of Peronism, like the period precisely of the Nestor Kirchner government and later that of Cristina. They represent a branch of Peronism. It is a side of Peronism. Not all Peronism is enrolled in Kirchnerism, which produces a strong internal conflict. Within the sectors of power of historical Peronism, so to speak, many have made an alliance with the right, even with Macri, so that Cristina does not continue in power. So it is an internal problem of Peronism. It is a political problem and it is an economic problem. The situation is complicated. Well, now the holidays are coming, the courts close, and until March, let's say that publicly there is no way to act because justice goes into recession until February.
It seems that there is a very marked division in this moment in Argentina. Do you think Peronism has any chance on the upcoming elections, or was this a mortal blow?
Inflation cannot be stopped, although we do not have a dollarized economy. Here a lot depends on the dollar and on a dollar that has about 6 or 7 exchange rates at the same moment. But the dollar that people buy to save or to travel is an expensive dollar. Those who really have economic power sell it, buy it, make it go down, go up. There are arrangements that they make themselves, but hey, that's the story for the working class. The problem of the dollar hits the middle class more because the lower class has no chance. They are not thinking about going on vacation and buying dollars. They are thinking about how to eat today, about how to make ends meet with the inflation that exists, which is also the product of sectors of power, of companies. That is, there's a very large lobby of companies, of the media, of mass media that are against the government. And there is also the weakness of the current president because he didn't hold his end on deals with the vice president herself about decisions on which they had previous agreements when they took office in 2019. So that has also generated another problem within the government itself. Plus, added to this, as I told you before, we are in election time, so the future is uncertain. Of course, Peronism is going to play all the cards to, if Cristina is not the candidate, to find the best candidate, a candidate that has and that is credible. Because what happens is that there is a marked decline in the politics, and this is not only happening in Argentina, this is happening almost everywhere in the world, I would say, unfortunately. Because the problem is not political ideas, the problem is those who exercise politics, they are leaders. There is a crisis of leaders, of leadership, also very, very deep, and we see it in Latin America. And we see how these coups d'etat from the judiciary, or lawfare, as it is called, have been repeated from Dilma, Lula, Correa in Ecuador, and so on. When there are progressive governments, it is like a whole atmosphere of chaos is generated so that those governments do not last. And why do I say progressive governments? I don't call them from the left because here there isn't a leftist government, there is a Peronist government. The left is far from reaching power, it has its deputies, it has its congressmen, but no, it is not strong enough to reach the presidency. At this moment, the big problem is the confrontation between Peronism and the opposition, which is Macrismo and its aligned parties led by Mauricio Macri.
Precisely one of the questions and comments that our viewers and our listeners make the most is the role played in all of this by U.S. imperialism. You think there was a role that the CIA played in there, or was it just internal politics?
No, obviously it's not just internal dynamics. There are always the internal partners and the external partners in this. There are issues of interest here, and one of the big problems with Cristina is that Cristina reveals certain capital groups' interests. She denounces them. So she affects private interests, she fights with the mass media, which is allied to imperialism, she fights with the business sectors and their allies. Another issue here is our resources. Our countries in Latin America have all the natural resources. We are the world's reserve. So there is lithium, gold, oil, everything that our countries have in reality, and there lays. I think one of the big problems, or the biggest problem, when those natural resources are defended, when the patrimony of our people is defended, problems follow. In a northern province, Bill Gates has just bought thousands of hectares of lithium, something that cannot happen because it is national heritage, yet they did it. So when those private interests are revealed, when those things are discovered and everything that goes along with that, it becomes a conflict of interest, followed by political problems, economic problems, and social problems. And well, the future, I don't know what it is, but obviously we're in a pretty deep conflict, and we'll see who wins the battle. I always believe and I hope that democracy, common sense, and governments that really support the people win, because poverty and misery is something that is not justified in your country or in mine or anywhere else, because each of our countries has natural wealth. The problem is that wealth is in the hands of a few.
Pienso que una de las preguntas más importantes es sobre qué tan
Precisely on that issue, there are many other countries where there have been progressive or left-wing governments and where, unfortunately, the work has not been effective and in many cases has even damaged the ideological current, has even damaged the working class, because people lose confidence in certain political operators, because sometimes they end up taking care of themselves instead of the collective. In this case, how effective was Peronism? How effective are the Kirchners in bringing solutions to the working class and to those more vulnerable?
mejorar la vida de las gentes más vulnerables?
Bueno, en el gobierno.
Well, before the Kirchner government, we came from a big crisis in 2003, with the background of then-President De La Rua leaving in a helicopter. It was a terrible economic crisis where there were deaths on December 21st, 2003. Nestor Kirchner takes office, and in reality, in the 4 years of Nestor Kirchner's government, Argentina changed. He changed the social mood, he changed the situation of the people. The problem of work and lack of work is that the state also does not necessarily have the obligation to create companies. That's what national companies are for, that's what private companies are for, to provide jobs. The state does. And to the people who cannot be employed, the state has to give them assistance because there is no work, because the money from Argentina is abroad. It is not reinvested here in job sources. It's all outside. Argentina's capitals are on the Caribbean islands, right? Well, we already know everything that happened with the Panama documents and all that. And we are talking about millions and millions more than what Argentina's foreign debt is itself. So it is very difficult when a country does not invest on itself. Few companies have remained, and those that today provide work are not enough for the working class. They're not productive and have work. So the populist governments, in this case Peronism, resort, as Macri also resorted, to assistance. And this is what is not understood. Mauricio Macri's government, which was an opposition government, which was a right-wing government and was against all that, also had to do the same, because generating jobs as he promised, he did not generate any. The companies did not come. So it's a conflict, and I really go back to the beginning. It's a conflict with Peronism. Peronism is a problem for the interests of capital in Argentina. Juan Domingo Perón and Eva Perón already lived fighting with the oligarchy, cow breeders at the time. And they are the same ones, those who have power today. They are just their heirs. Although some new groups have been added with the same strategic interests, the great role of the media, mainstream media, that are functional to the system. They're the ones that are on television, radio, and printed media all day, promoting and accentuating the crisis, this division, this rift, whatever you want to call it, not leading to nothing, confusing everyone. And the people fighting with each other all the time.
I mean, it seems to be also a generational problem. And there is an already established generation of leaders, where the Kirchners and the Macri. But how do you see the change of leaders? Does Peronism and the working class in Argentina have...
There is a danger in the extreme right with the candidate that emerges in the midst of all this. He is Javier Milei. Milei, who has been blessed by the United States and other sectors, as some churches, like the Evangelical Church, for which a long time have been financing campaigns on our continent, where now it is no longer about just going to pray or going to church, but they're making inroads in the states and the stages of power in governments. So this is a serious problem, that people who believe that people out of ignorance, because they don't bother how much to know what the real problem is, what the story is. Young people don't know history because the story they tell you is always the one that benefits those in power. So the story that is known is not the real one, but the one that is sold to you in most cases. So that generates a mistrust and absolute disbelief. It is incredible to see young people adding votes and points and voting intention for this candidate from the right. It's a real problem. I don't think he's going to have any chance of winning, but if he is already a deputy, he already has his party and he already has the entire network extended at the national level to run for president. So we need to reflect on this. What happens is that this history of Peronism is a history of 60 years. It is a phenomenon that is not only political, it is social, sociological phenomenon. It is a little hard to understand for countries that do not experience it. Peronism is something else, and even a little hard to understand for many Argentines themselves.
Will it be fair to call Peronism a left-wing populist movement?
Bueno, yo no estoy de acuerdo con eso. Yo creo que la izquierda tiene su...
Well, I don't agree with that. I believe that the left has its context, has its ideology. Peronism has never been on the left. Peronism is a movement that goes from the most progressive sectors here, which have been the Kirchners, to the most reactionary sectors, also from the right, as well as some in their movements. You have all kinds of people. So the reaction, as I told you before, is to the sector of Peronism that is progressive, that has ideas, that has some officials who were left from the 1970s, who have worked in government. But this doesn't mean that it is a left-wing government. It is a Peronist government.
Ha tenido funciones, pero no quiere decir que sea un gobierno de izquierda.
Y más allá de la retórica,
Beyond the veil of right and left in Argentina,
¿tiene alguna fuerza política defendiendo?
is there a political force that is defending the interests of the working class?
Sí, la izquierda. La izquierda.
Yes, the left, and the left is opposing Kirchnerism, for example, which is not very well understood, but it does have a position because it is against populism, let's say. And so the social movements rise up at this moment. There is very big conflict with some social movements because, well, there is an idea of converting the social plans into sources of work to stop generating dependence of the people toward the government's social assistance plans, but also to demonstrate that those plans are a source of work and they function. That is to say, the government is trying to get jobs for people to work 4 hours or 5 hours a day, whatever they can. But some trade unions reject that. And so a very serious conflict has started, a very serious discussion that goes against the government by some trade union leaders who move large amounts of people, very powerful social movements. So that is, let's say, the most left-wing sector, which does not mean that everyone there is from the left, because there are also Peronists in there.
Todos en izquierda porque también hay peronistas allá adentro.
Adriana Spira, we greet you from Arizona with a little sip of mate to congratulate the Argentine homeland for that tremendous victory in the World Cup, and also wish you even better days in 2023.
Sí, la verdad que durante el Mundial y después de...
Yes, the truth is that during the World Cup and after the Cup, the Argentine people demonstrated deeply in the streets. 6 million people came out to congratulate, to show their joy for this championship, which obviously does not solve any of the problems we have been talking about. But at least the populace wanted to celebrate, and they celebrated. I also wanted to add something that is essential for this analysis.
También quería agregarte una cosa que es fundamental para mí.
Because with regard to the vice president and everything that is happening, I think that the issue of gender interferes a lot with everything that is happening. The fact that Cristina is a woman with power, an intelligent woman, a woman who takes decisions, who has been president twice, she has been a senator, she has been a congresswoman, that today she is the vice president and president of the Senate. I think that for a society that is so patriarchal and sexist, this is another knot in this whole plot and in this whole story.
Que eso para la sociedad que es tan patriarcal y machista es otro de los nudos de toda esta trama y de toda esta historia.